Welcome back. In the previous video, we looked at some key aspects of a project finance transaction. In this video, we look a bit more at why project finance developed. The reasons for this give us insights that come in handy in the rest of this course. Project finance has particularly taken flight in infrastructure investments. This was traditionally government territory. In the past, governments would invest in roads, power utilities, prisons, and many other assets. Those investments were traditionally funded through government funding. These are mostly tax receipts and government borrowing, which is another area in finance. Infrastructure investment has grown strongly for many decades for a variety of reasons. In developed countries, it took off to catch up for years of underinvestment. These countries had outdated infrastructure that could not keep up with population growth, increased usage, and the higher demands of modern times. Governments like to use infrastructure investment as a good and effective way to support their economy in troubled times. It injects extra money that props up the economy when times are economically tough. In developing countries, infrastructure investment is proven to be a good measure to support the economic development of poor countries and help these countries climb out of poverty. Better roads, sanitized water, and reliable access to power aid in a country's development. So the scale of infrastructure investment grew enormously. Unfortunately, government finances were unable to keep up with this growth. Nearly all governments chronically spend more than they earn. In democracies, this was probably the case because extra spending attracts more favorable votes for politicians than budget cuts do. So the government debt levels are usually chronically too high already. Look at the graph here of the Eurozone economies. These are among the strongest economies in the world. Even those economies had an average debt level of 90% of GDP in 2014. Although these countries agreed that 60% is the maximum level to borrow safely. Private financing of infrastructure can be an answer to this overspending. Imagine that a project can raise financing itself. In that case, the government does not need to strain its already overburdened government finances. We call this type of transaction a PPP, or public-private partnership. This is because the government and the private sector work together. Typically, the government gives a concession to an SPV in order to build and operate an infrastructure asset for a certain number of years. The project asset can, for example, be a road, a power plant, or prison. In this operating period, the SPV can earn its investment back in revenues, plus an acceptable investment return. The earnings generated by the SPV can be fees payable by the users, toll fees. These can also be a concession fees payable by the government that provides the concession. In a concession fee, the government still pays for the infrastructure investment. However, in the case it does so for an extended period of time. For example, it can be spread out over 25 years. So tight government budgets have aided the development of project finance. An added benefit is that PPP projects have been found to be completed more cheaply, with better quality, and in a more timely manner. It is thought that there are a few reasons for this. Firstly, the involvement of the private partners. This can be in combination with a rigorous tendering process. Such a tendering process can bring out the most competitive party for infrastructure projects in terms of planning, operations, and financial practices. The involvement of banks has brought an early and effective focus on risk areas. Thorough advanced planning has helped to identify and mitigate problems before they occur. PPP projects have enabled the recycling of valuable project knowledge and experience, because skilled and experienced parties keep working with one another in subsequent projects. Infrastructure investment tends to have a relatively low investment return. We saw in the video on financial analysis that this makes the financing challenging. The funding cost needs to be below the returns that the investment can generate. If the project can only generate an IRR of 6%, then we will need to fund the project at an overall rate of much less than 6%. Otherwise, the project company would make no profit and it would not invest. This means that you have to work with a large proportion of debt because it is cheaper. Furthermore, that same debt is limited recourse in nature. This means that the lenders can only be satisfied with the project cash flows. This is due to the ring fencing of the project in the SPV. This is a challenging combination of factors. And this has driven project finance to be very focused on risk management and mitigation. Furthermore, that focus has aided the success rate of PPP projects. The success of project finance has not gone unnoticed. We are seeing project finance not only spread to new project areas, for example PPPs for prisons, hospitals, sea defenses and public transport, but we are also seeing the application of PPPs for investment in developing countries, for example water sanitation and agriculture. We'll see later on that project finance demands a very tight and transparent governance structure. This is usually dictated by the lenders, and it aims to reduce their risks. This governance structure also aids the success of project finance transactions in developing countries. Countries that often have poor governance traditions themselves. A project finance project may bring the instant access to first world management practices and experience. Project finance does not only occur in PPPs. So in terms of joint transactions with governments, private companies can project finance their investments too. In the previous video we saw the example of ENGIE and the creation of its new solar farm. The drivers here are much the same as those I explained for the governments. It is attractive for sponsors to seek project finance to fund their investments. It takes a strain off their corporate financial resources. Most private companies also have a chronic shortage of corporate financial resources. It is quite an appealing idea that they can realize a project whilst at the same time needing to deploy only very limited corporate funds. The only funds that the private sponsor needs to tie up are usually his equity investment in the SPV. This is often no more than 10 to 15% of the total project investment. These are some of the factors that help to explain why project finance has taken such a flight. Some course material will be made available online. This will take you through more aspects than we can address within the limits of this video. We have treated the ones that mark the essence of project finance in this video. This hopefully gives you some meaningful background information to the financing of projects. Especially when you become aware of the context, this can help you to understand the topic and remember it better. I hope that you are enjoying this course and that we will see you soon. Thanks for listening.